crime was unconstitutional. And the court agreed with that argument. It struck down the provisions in the Writers' Assemblies Act, which defined incitement to encompass incitement to commit any crime. They narrowed that definition to fit more specifically with the constitutional definition, and the Writers' Assemblies Act now is to be read such that the criminalization is of incitement to commit serious or violent crime. But typically, we're talking about incitement to commit violence. And I think that this is the danger that we are seeking to address online. Obviously, the online forum is a very, and the way in which communication and expression happens online over the internet is very different from the manner in which we have understood speech and expression to happen within our public discourse before the advent of the internet and online. And we can talk about the differences and whether that requires us to think differently about how we look to safeguard freedom of expression. What are the particular elements? How do we fit this right in a very different context, right? Because the public square, public discourse looks very different nowadays when it's conducted so much online from what it did in past decades. So we can have that discussion. I just wanted to talk now, just a step back for a few minutes, having set out fairly broadly what incitement is, what the harm is that what we would look to engage, to address, to just talk a little bit about sort of social media specifically and X, and sort of my experiences there. Again, the tool you'll hear about wouldn't only look to capture incitement on X, but I wanted to just reflect on this experience for a moment. Some of you might have read Walter Isaacson's recent biography of Elon Musk. If you have, you'll search in vain in that biography for any account by Isaacson of how growing up in apartheid South Africa affected Musk's thinking in much the same way that you would search on X for any content moderation. There really is very, very little. And yet, I mean, Musk obviously left South Africa at a fairly early age, but he would have grown up aware of the example of someone like Helen Suzman. And I don't want to overstate Helen Suzman's resistance and protest to apartheid, right? I mean, most of the most compelling, fierce resistance was obviously undertaken by the liberation movements, civil society that aligned itself with those liberation movements. But Helen Suzman, for 13 years, was the sole voice of opposition in South Africa's apartheid parliament. And she used that forum very well, because at a time of enormous censorship and oppression, in fact, the press was allowed relative freedom in reporting on the events in Parliament. So Helen would often use that forum to bring to light information, particularly about detained and disappeared individuals, and allow that to be reported in Hansard, the record of the Parliament's proceedings, and that would then be printed online and would be brought to public attention. I should say that, I mean, Helen also faced enormous attack and insult, and she is notorious for having had a whistle, because she would receive these anonymous phone calls, abusive phone calls threatening her, and she would use her whistle in order to blow down the telephone. And I have to say, I mean, I have thought about that example and thought that it would be so wonderful if one had an equivalent on social media, right? That you could have the whistle to you know, to respond. But at the time of Verwoerd's assassination, P.W. Botha, who was then a serving member of parliament, accused Helen of having been responsible for the assassination, and that led to, outside of parliament, an intensification of the attacks and threats to Helen. And in fact, even within apartheid's parliament, the rules required, and the Speaker of Parliament demanded of P.W. Botha that he retract that accusation and that he apologized. And I make that analogy out, that example, only because even in apartheid's parliament, there were rules and regulations that regulated expression in a way that we don't see on social media, right? And that actually, had South Africa's apartheid parliament been conducted in much the same way that social media is today, Helen Suzman would just not have been possible, right? She would have simply been drowned out. She would have been so assailed by threats and attacks, she would have not been able to make the types of interventions and disclosures that she made. Somebody like Elon Musk insists that he is a free speech absolutist. And that might be the countercultural response of somebody who grew up in 1980s apartheid South Africa, or although I think it probably has more to do with kind of financial profits that he had gleaned from management without any content moderation. But I think, and here I just want to read you this. I mean, Musk is not alone in insisting that, free speech online, one must have an absolutist sort of predisposition. Content moderation, is somehow equivalent to censorship and to a limitation of that. But I think that stance fails to grasp what a Princeton academic, Zeynep Tufekci, has articulated, and which I think is so compelling, that the most effective forms of censorship today involve meddling with trust and attention, not muzzling speech itself. As a result, they don't look much like the old forms of censorship at all. They look like viral or coordinated harassment campaigns, which harness the dynamics of viral outrage to impose an unbearable and disproportionate cost on the act of speaking out. They look like epidemics of disinformation meant to undercut the credibility of valid information sources. They look like bot-fueled campaigns of trolling and distraction, or piecemeal leaks of hacked materials meant to swamp the attention of traditional media. And I think that is, as I said, a really compelling articulation of the threats that we face, particularly in the online world. And I think, again, it sort of is reflective of a very different context in which speech and expression operate, and how we should think about them and what it is we're looking to value and preserve, and takes it outside of the traditional context prior to the internet and online platforms. And again, I think this can go to some of the discussion we might have afterwards. I would only note that, whilst somebody like Musk has shown himself contemptuous of, any attempts at sort of content moderation, he sort of withdrew from the EU's code of conduct. He is suing the state of California for their requirement that social media platforms disclose their content moderation and how they are looking to address hate speech, speech promoting racism, despite promising to increase his election integrity team. He in fact slashed that. In Africa, it's, we're talking about a whole continent, not just countries here. In Africa itself, on purchasing X, he basically shuttered the single office that was on this continent, and there has been there's no content moderation for these markets. And I should say that as when I have seen that, the effects of that. So prior to Trump acquiring X, prior to Trump, sorry, that was a Freudian slip. Prior to Musk acquiring X, our work at the Helen Suzman Foundation meant that we were, sometimes coming up against people who were looking to troll and attack and threaten us. Prior to Musk acquiring X, we would, and particularly with the assistance of William and Real 411, we actually had a hope of having some of the worst of those content and posts taken down. After Musk acquired X, there was no response. There just was no response to the requests for takedown, despite authoritative determinations by Real 411. And so, I do think that, this is a particular concern of mine, that for us who live in South Africa, that our country at this particular moment in time, will be remembered less in the history books for the health and longevity of its democracy than for being the birthplace of a man who did much to put a torch to the fundamentals of democracy. I think you'll hear I recognize that I've particularly focused on Musk and X, and I think that is particularly egregious example, but I think we see those dangers across social media platforms, and we'll speak to that a little more. I'll end with a little anecdote, which is, I think, reflective of how entirely absent there is of any content moderation of X, but it also speaks, I suppose, to sort of northern suburbs, Johannesburg. And at the time when the Helen Suzman Foundation and I particularly were facing really sort of horrible threats on X, my mother was concerned to me, and she asked me if she asked me if she thought she should approach our family dermatologist. Our family dermatologist, who we'd gone to for many, many years, is in fact Elon Musk's uncle, Dr. Musk. And so there was this bizarre idea that this man who had sort of saved me from teenage acne might also have to sort of save me from the equivalent of like really sort of cystic acne. Yes, but that didn't happen. And as you can imagine, a sort of a call to the family dermatologist, despite being Elon Musk's uncle, was about as useful as trying to report these posts to X and asking for them to take it down. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicole, for that introduction. So for anyone who doesn't know me as yet, which is I think 99% of everyone here, except for William and Billy, I head up a company called Oxo Digital, and we specialize in building AI custom models. And in building custom AI models, we're able to do some fascinating things out in the world, things that are humanly impossible. That's what technology enables us to do. And for us, Oxo is the goddess of growth, nature, natural, which for us is important to focus on humans, who we are. And the digital aspect is obviously technology. And as Nicole was saying, technology is a fantastic thing. It's made our lives infinitely better, but it can also be something that can be quite dangerous in a lot of cases. And online social media has had the ability to essentially move mountains, so to speak. Things like influencing elections, leading to people who are trying to do good being shut down, certain disinformation being propagated across the world. So for us, bringing back things to a human side of what is true and what is good has been important, and we use AI to do that. I'll ask Theo a little bit just now to give you an introduction to what we've done in I3, which is insights into incitement. But we've been working with MMA for since the beginning of this year, essentially. So in a very short space of time, we've been able to kind of get the first versions of this platform done, and we're already seeing some fantastic results. So we hope your minds are already blown and you start to see where the world's headed in fighting back against some of the I guess, awful things that can happen in the online space with, I guess, using technology in a bit of a better way to do that and bring us back to a world that we're proud of and that we're actually happy with, even in a digital space. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks. Testing. Is this on? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Theo. I'm co-founder of Oxo Digital and the technical lead. Perhaps before we get into the demo, I'd like to just speak a little bit around why we built this tool, or what is the need for building, an AI tool for, as we've deemed such an important topic. So as we've realized, incitement to violence can be quite detrimental, especially at scale, especially when you have, people in positions of influence and power who are saying things to people that really just listen to them. And what we'd found coming into this project is that there was a big problem in actually detecting these things on social media and online. Number one, because it's like finding a needle in a haystack. You have, very few number of people sifting through unquantifiable amounts of data, essentially trying to find these nuanced phrases and instances of incitement. And even at the beginning of the project, I remember we spent, a couple of hours debating a few examples as to whether some things were incitement or not. So even within the context of what is incitement, from a human perspective, that's quite a difficult task to perform, to actually say, whether this is or isn't incitement in black and white. So what we'd found in proposing our solution was that AI is a really good use case for something like this. Number one, because it can scrape, again, unquantifiable amounts of data within a matter of seconds or minutes, and it's much faster than humans or even a team of humans. The benefits to actually using AI for this use case is that you can keep training and reinforcing the model, and it's really, really good with pattern recognition. The challenge with humans is, people might get sick, people might, leave the organization or something like that, and then you have to train someone new. You kind of have to start from scratch. Whereas something like an AI model is this continuously evolving platform or tool that you can keep using. So I'll lead us into the demo with that in mind, and then after this video, so watch a short video. We'll just speak a little bit about how it actually works, some of the challenges and limitations we found with it, and then we'll dive into what's to come with this platform and what the future of it holds. Oh, seem to be having some. Yeah. Let's try that again. It seems we don't have audio, so I'll maybe just speak through it a bit. Essentially, we have a dashboard here. So if you go to iiiafrica.org, you'll be faced with a dashboard. And this dashboard shows you on an RGB scale, essentially, a number of different scraped things like tweets, things like Facebook posts, web articles, etc. I think what I'll actually do is I'll just go straight to the website. This video doesn't seem to be complying today. Okay, so essentially this dashboard is the output of our trained model. So the trained model goes through a process of training where it actually learns to identify from predefined examples what is or isn't incitement and what's a little bit difficult to tell. So what might be, for example, in between. Now, once the model is trained, we can then use it to analyze new unseen data, and it will give us an idea based off of its prior knowledge, whether it is or isn't incitement. Now, because incitement isn't this, black or white thing, the way that this model works is that it works with an RAG scale, so red, amber, green, where red is a high probability of incitement. Amber is it's potentially incitement, but also potentially not. We're actually not quite sure. And then not likely is it's most likely not incitement. Now, this also does have a confidence score for each example. So I'll just show you, for example, if we, and you can filter these different examples. So if I, for example, go to, let's say, a red one, then you can actually see what the content says. If we move over here, you can see that it gives it a score as a percentage. So a really high percentage would indicate that it's a higher probability of incitement versus a lower percentage. And if you come back to the dashboard, we can actually see over time how much incitement is being put out into the media. So the idea with this is that, if we scan this over, let's say, years of data, we could see specific periods where perhaps incitement spiked. So, perhaps this is around something like elections. You might see a little bit of a spike. And then hopefully in future, we can also see a bit of a correlation between those data points. Okay. I'll move out of the dashboard and quickly into the methodology so that we can just understand how we actually went about this process of creating this tool. So Oz, would you like to give us just an overview of how we started with this tool, how we actually laid the context and strategized?
Yeah, of course. So it turns out that defining incitement is quite a difficult task. So working with the MMA team, a number of lawyers were brought in, industry experts, people with various expertise across the field in media, research, etc. So we had a room, I think, of probably 12 plus people of different kind of experiences, skills, backgrounds to help us define this. It then went through a long process of actually looking through tons of case studies. So just imagine this, you're looking at a court case where they didn't even have a framework as to whether something was incitement or not. And they came to a conclusion through many discussions, as Nicole had mentioned, the occupation of land and that Malema was doing, and trying to get a better understanding of is something incitement or not. Sometimes it's easy. If someone says, look, be sharp at the selection station, I'm going to kill you. That's pretty obvious. But if someone says, be sharp at the selection station and vote for this party, maybe something bad will happen. Is that incitement or is it not? It really gets you thinking as to is something intimidation or threat. So we have to go through quite a long process to firstly figure out if we believe something is not. We came up with a working definition. And from that, we also then had to then train the model. Just for maybe a little bit of context, we did look for something around the world that would help us or kickstart us into this process. So the question was, is there maybe a tool out there that's able to detect incitement to violence? Something, let's say, in another country, maybe the US, which we know how crazy the election periods are, 3 seconds, some apparent media perception, and happening. And It turns out that there's very little that's actually being done in developing tools that are actually able to do this, and very few people actually do it. As we've already mentioned, even on X, we've kind of gone the opposite route, where if you're reporting something online, no one's really going to look at it. So the only kind of power you have is to maybe go down to the authorities if you feel like something incitements, and then the authorities will go through a long process, it turns out, to try and find the culprits of this. But in the online space, a lot of those accounts are anonymized. A lot of them are actually then leading to actually steps of the masses that you're not actually sure who's behind these profiles. So in kind of coming up with this working definition, we then needed to apply this to what we call a training set. So using humans, we then eventually went through hundreds of thousands of different records, classifying it whether it was red, but definitely incitements at the green. From that training set, we were then able to extrapolate that same level of thinking to a broader data set. To get into to understand a little bit better the difference between artificial intelligence, which is what we're using here, and say an Excel model, which you might be used to, is its ability to almost think at a human-like level. And it gets to that level through the way we build it here. We'll go through that in a second. But at its kind of base principle, imagine it as something that's able to look at something in almost in a human-like way, interpret whether it is that thing or not. So it's not a 1+1 is 2 in a lot of cases. It's a lot more complex than that to get to an answer. So those percentages you saw, like 82%, an AI type model has to go through a lot more steps and a lot more thinking. Almost the same way humans do when we're trying to critically analyze something to get to an answer. And that's what makes it so powerful. It's its ability to detect things in a way that we can't be able to.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe just to add to that, the learning process for an AI is very similar to that of animals or humans. In fact, the algorithms are modeled very closely related to animals and humans. So essentially, they learn by example and they learn through pattern recognition and association. So when Oz mentions things like an AI is able to almost think like a human, it's because it was designed with that human-like intelligence in mind. And you're essentially teaching it to learn as opposed to telling it to do a specific task. So to touch on then just a little bit of the methodology that we went through in training this. We start off with our data collection, which involved, again, let's just have a look at the team. We had lawyers, linguists, data scientists, and ML engineers, as well as project managers, kind of all work together at this point to, extract that data and to essentially get it into a format where it was ready for the AI model to be trained. And we then move on to a step called pre-processing in the diagram. So pre-processing is just helping it understand things like special characters. We found that in pulling social media data, people use strange text. They use things like emojis. So it's just about handling that data in a predictable way. Following that, we then move on to the actual model training and the evaluation. So this is where you essentially have your training data, which might be something like 30,000 examples of what is, isn't, and might or might not be incitement. And then the AI learns through association of that classification. Part of that is also a performance evaluation, which is a testing phase. So your model learns, and then after some time, you'll stop training your model. You'll then test it to see how well it performs. And then if it's good enough, we move on to something called deployment, where we can actually use that model to now try and process new data and see if we can gain meaningful insights from that. Following that, we then feed it into the dashboard, and then through administrators' access of our dashboard, we can actually evaluate how well the model does. So I'll show you that quickly. if we go into an example over here, just go to the first one here. We can see this is a post from Reddit. It says, just opening the door doesn't kill you, walking forward does. I mean, that is clearly green, but suppose we didn't think it was, we could then go into the human classification and we could actually just change it right there. And then what that does in the background is that feeds into the reinforcement data set of the model, and we can actually use that to improve the model. So what we'd found in the first versions of the model, for example, was that a lot of South African slang, things like moer and klap, the AI model had no idea what that was because that wasn't part of its training data set. And the base model that we were using is mainly contextualized on the English language. So by doing it this way, we're able to then continuously reinforce that model, and it gets better and better over time. Another really funny example we found right at the beginning was that people would be speaking about soccer, and they would say, let's kill the opposition. And the model was saying that's incitement, and we had to go back to the training data sets and be like, how can we provide its examples so that it can understand, within the context of perhaps sports or TV shows or just the entertainment industry in general, that even though we might be saying something like, let's kill this cheeseburger, that's not actually incitement. So it's been a very interesting process, and it's this continuous ongoing process of training so that we can get it to really identify those more nuanced examples. And to perhaps answer the question of how it identifies those nuances, a nice way to think about it would be, how do you identify those nuances? It's building up that context over a long period of time of what is a soccer team or what is this thing that you eat versus someone, for example, or a target group. Okay, so I'll leave these steps up here just so that you guys could read them if you'd like. But I just want to move on then to just a few of the caveats and limitations of this, which is part and parcel of what I was mentioning just now around, say, the soccer teams and the cheeseburger and slang. Essentially, the model accuracy is reliant on the training data. So if you haven't given it examples of specific, let's say, cases of incitement, it may not detect those specific cases of incitement. So this is a limitation of the platform, but it's one that we're, continuously monitoring and continuously trying to improve on. The other one is the model interpretation as well. So we were getting false positives or false negative or negatives. That again was a case of, the soccer teams, for example, it would say that it's incitement, versus it being perhaps green or even amber in that situation. The other one is just around the cost constraints of the model. So AI is quite expensive. We've done quite a lot of work to actually optimize those costs in the way that the model has been set up. So part of this has been working in an entire workflow for the process with principles such as, if you have new data that you want to analyze, you don't have to reanalyze all the data. You just have to analyze the new data and then add that into your database. And then as well, going into the new training of, or the training of a new model, as that data set expands, how do you monitor costs so that it doesn't become this thing that just, increasingly scales with cost over time? And of course, this also being, part of public research and everything, cost is a very important one to keep minimal as well. So yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up on the caveats and the limitations of this model. Is there perhaps anything else that we wanted to ask?
So I think maybe just to put it in other words, so you're saying so I'll try to provide some bring it back into the metaphor is imagine imagine something that is, you've got one human, let's say, able to detect incitement of violence. So they're online, they're looking through various, influencers' tweets, and they're reading, they're trying to figure out something incitement, and then they report it. Now imagine you're able to take that one human that's really good at detecting incitement, you're able to multiply it by 1,000 and fraction of the cost. That's essentially what we're looking at here from the AI perspective. And that's what it's allowing us to do. So scalability using technology is what we're doing here. And then beyond scalability, what we foresee coming is also an ability to get smarter and smarter how we detect certain things. And that will come from picking up on trends. So now that you scan, say, 1,000, and you've got 50 of those being incitement, are there some trends between those 50? Are we seeing multiple, say, influencers or maybe political figures? Maybe not, or people out there that are now working together to send or certain message, trying to influence things in a certain way. That's something that a human might struggle with because there's so many things. So that's what we're doing. We're still in the very early stages, hence the limitations and caveats of building this. So think of it as it's almost like, version 1, you've got a kid who's 12 years old. But as we start to retrain the model, we're adding more search terms, starting to understand data more, we expect it to get smarter and smarter. One of the things that people don't often realize is social media is actually a black box, even for those who have designed. What that means is there's actually artificial intelligence algorithms running in the background of those things that's able to push certain messages to certain people online. So that means that if you have a bias, as an example, if you believe that a certain message, let's say, let's say it's something racially motivated, your race is being disenfranchised in a way, and therefore you need to act out by voting down the building. And that message might be propagated to others that match your profile or see things, and the people who design it don't even know that the message is being propagated because they've optimized their platform engagement. So yes, engagement is going up, more people are using it because they're emotionally driven to use it. But this is what happens on social media. So there's artificial intelligence algorithms running in the background. For humans themselves, we don't, as consumers, we're not actually protected with our own artificial intelligence driven tools. So think of this as almost, us just now enabling us as on the other side of a very powerful tool that is going to get smarter as time goes by.
Yeah, 100%. And if I may add to that as well, this is more of a co-pilot. So we're not necessarily saying that this will replace the human's role in detecting incitement, but rather this makes the human's role in detecting incitement a lot easier. Instead of having to, sift through thousands of different media sources, and within each of those media sources, 1,000 different data points, you could essentially come to this dashboard, filter all the red ones or all the amber ones, and then you're actually looking at a refined, filtered data set that's more likely to contain that needle in a haystack that you're actually looking for. Cool. If anyone has any questions, we'll just open to the floor.
I've got a serious question and a joke question. Nicole, the joke question to you. What's it like having using a Musk family member as almost using a Musk family member as your trump card?
I didn't. Thanks. We never got that. I mean, the fact is, I did contemplate. I think it's a reflection, as I said, the complete absence of other forms of redress. But we did there. So we did.
And then my question for Theo and Oz is twofold. One, what was the big learning thing that you guys took away in this project that you didn't know before? And then the second one is there potentially a way in the future to open up this model and to maybe monetize it to fund this, but allow other people to use the outputs of the model? Is that technically feasible? That's my question.
I'll maybe just start with a little bit of the learning, I suppose, and then as I suppose you can tackle the business question. So, sorry about that. So essentially, coming into this project or coming into any AI project, you have a couple of choices to make, and the big question is, can we use something that's pre-existing? Should we build something that's quite new? And I think one of the big learnings in this was trying to create something based on new data and how to, go about that process. And the reason I say new data is because to find examples of incitement is extremely difficult just because of the censored nature of open source data sets and open source models, and even just open source examples of what incitement is. So one of the big learnings was how to, essentially use data augmentation to create a scaled or a large data set that's good enough to train a model, and to do that with a few amounts of people at once. So it was a very interesting exercise. It was one that had a little bit of red tape around, because if you do try to use these open source models and things like that, they have guidelines and restrictions, and if you're putting insightful things into those models, it can potentially be very bad. So yeah, that was a very good learning.
I think for us, so we love to develop projects that deliver tangible value within a few months, which it turns out in the tech space doesn't happen very often. So you could go years without actually seeing the fruits of anything. So think of it almost as also creating a really good cake, but you've only got 2 hours before your guests arrive. And you've also got a very tight budget to do that in. And yet you really want to impress your guests with this cake. And it's going to have a few ingredients on it. Not everything, but a few good ingredients. So think of your project being that we wanted to deliver something that actually deliver tangible value, so you get good insights. But as Theo mentioned, developing an AI model can be very costly. And so we had to set up the infrastructure, so your cloud infrastructure, in such a way that didn't escalate your costs through the roof. We also wanted to get to the definition of incitement as quickly as possible, and not have weeks on end of doing pre-training, so that we could just have a few hours. So it was really a balancing, juggling act to get to the answer. So I think that was our biggest takeaways, that it can be done. And we've taken some really good learnings, especially with something that is, as Theo mentioned, as sensitive as defining incitement of violence, and with real world data as well. This is no longer a research project where you're doing it in a safe academic environment. This is something that's out in the world, and maybe that's a good segue into the second question of, where do we, could this thing be used elsewhere? I think Williams mentioned it a few times, but for us, we'd love to develop something that improves democracies across the world, and I think beyond that, I think the MMA team will use a line like that. But for us, it also we would use a line of improves humans' lives around the world. So that means how do we get other countries to kind of use this model off the shelf a little bit, take a lot of the learnings that we have, but kind of apply it to their environment, where people can be reported or counts can be reported quicker, people feel safer online, people are negatively influenced less, especially without them knowing. We can kind of predict when a certain negative event might be happening. As an example, you know, if this thing were used in the US, could they have seen, I think it's called a Congress or parliamentary bill, I can't remember, but maybe the public would have been aware that, you know, this riots would have happened a few days before, because, you know, an I3 in that environment would have already seen multiple accounts across the web flagging up to say, listen, we're actually going to storm this building and take it down. A lot of that data, apparently, the FBI knew, and, you know, the NSA, etc., but they hadn't released it to the public. This is a public tool. Anyone can actually go to it, and that for us is important. Is how do we empower, you know, the day-to-day person with that, and we foresee building it out and then helping others also get good, valuable information from it.
You had any outcomes? You had any outcomes of the detection? It's an entirely a detection business.
Yes.
Have you had outcomes? What have you done with them?
So
What's for life?
in terms of what we've done with the outcomes, I'll probably defer that question to William. But what we've seen from the platform at the moment is, in some cases it's really good. In other cases, it does need quite a bit of improvement. Now, what we plan to do with the tool is plug it into Real 411. So Real 411 has an initiative going on at the moment where essentially you can report instances of incitement and they'll look into it. So this platform would essentially fast track, you know, identifying those cases of incitement and allow you to essentially see them straight in the Real 411 platform right away. So essentially, it's fast tracking the detection of incitement as opposed to just detecting it. William, would you like to perhaps answer?
No, so it's one of the hardest things with this is just how ridiculously difficult it is to understand when something is incitement, the difference between a threat or something that's just plain horrible, or racism or misogyny, and then being able to determine whether or not that speech crosses a legal threshold, which is what Nicole was talking about, such that it is a breach of community guidelines, such that it means you can then actually have that content actioned, either taken down or de-escalated, or whatever the appropriate response is, right? So that's the one thing, is action from platforms and platform accountability, and that you want to try and make sure that you allow and facilitate speech on those things, but that speech stays within our legal limits. So the goal is that we can use that to report to the platforms, and hopefully they can then identify the users and take action against them as and where appropriate. The other thing is that if we can start to get it near to live and sufficiently accurate, it means that it could be used to help prevent outbreaks of violence. I don't think it's quite there yet. So some of the things that it's learning still about lines, and one of the easy, obvious ones is kill the boer, right? Yeah. So there's lots of comments about kill the boer, kill the farmer. Already as that phrase, it's deeply contested whether or not that constitutes incitement or hate speech. Incitement is an element of hate speech. So you can say kill the boer, kill the farmer is clearly on its own incitement, right? It's saying kill them. But at the same time, you're going and saying, well, if I'm reporting on this as something and I think it's offensive, I'm not using it to incite, but another user who takes it will say, let's go kill the boer, let's go kill the farmer. So just the context of it. And so it's got to learn sufficiently well to be able to distinguish between those. And then I think we'll be in a position that, you know, our national disaster bodies can refer to it, and we can use it to help try and prevent real life harms. The thing that I'm curious for Nicole to address is that there's a big difference between incitement, incitement to actual physical harm or damage, And then there's just plain old bullying. And bullying actually isn't a breach of. You can answer that.
Exactly. I mean, I was thinking about this as, I mean, you know, it's such an impressive demonstration. And I think it gives me, you know, a sense of hope that, you know, tech, I mean, certainly on social media platforms, suggesting that what we're facing is a kind of dystopian world of polarization and division. Well, perhaps, you know, the kind of tech tools like this can actually ameliorate that and be the cure. But it does bring me back to this question, William, and I mean, I'd love for us to have a discussion around this at some point, right? We talk about like why have we as, you know, publics, nation states, democracies sought to make freedom of expression sacrosanct? What is the purpose of that, right? Of old, why did we do that? Why is it thought to be so fundamental? And you know, there are a range of reasons for why we make freedom of speech this kind of sacrosanct right, kind of information, you know, the importance of imparting information, of being able to raise grievances, of this idea that kind of the better argument wins out, right? But that has generally happened within a kind of curated context, right? You get access to the public through curated mediums, through parliaments, through media, where you have an editor who makes a determination, not always right, but generally a kind of informed determination as to what is worth putting out in the public eye, right? We can, as friends, we can talk absolute rubbish, but that is not amplified for the public eye. What you're having with social media is a kind of the inverse of that, right? It's the algorithms which are making the determination as to what is amplified. And it's not, I mean, we know that lots of editors or, you know, heads of media houses have often looked to profile what is sensationalist, what is going to drive kind of, you know, eyes on a piece, and it's not really what is the public good. But I think that those curators, those arbiters have been so important. And that, as I say, is being rubbished by social media, because it's an algorithm, and the algorithm is kind of maximizing profit. It's maximizing sensationalism. It's maximizing keeping people's time on these medium. And if that is essentially the curation tool, then should what we be looking to discipline be something different, right? It's not just the big harms of incitement, right? That and like an algorithm like this, right? Running content through an algorithm like this that gives you a green, red, amber showing should be the funnel in terms of placement, right? If something is green, yes, it can go through and everyone can have public eyes on it. If it's amber, that should be demoted in terms of what the algorithm promotes. If it's red, it just really shouldn't be seen by anyone, right? And I think that really is a potentially really important usage of a tool like this, because it teaches us what the algorithms that are being utilized by the social media platforms should be doing.
So that you don't need any detection whatsoever, because you can just tune into the radio, which is the biggest communication medium in the whole country, and it spurts out in big gushes of tsunamis that free enterprise, which some people call capitalism, which stinks. Yes, the name stinks now, but free enterprise goes under the same name these days, and that is bad, evil. This is the stuff that we got to just nationalize. As simple as that. You don't need any detection. This is the biggest single evil, and there's no violence involved in it until the EFF goes and raids all these shops and Clixes and anything that is presumed to fall foul of anything, however slight. And Helen Zille is the most evil of all people in this whole country, according to our own media. Shame on you. Shame on you! How dare you? How dare you do that? And this is really bad stuff. And intelligent people like Eusebius, God may spare him wherever he is now, was responsible for that kind of thing. And many decent people were deriding a real heroine of Helen Zille, who brought up at least 4 or 5 major politicians in this country who are reasonably decent, like Mashaba and Mamusi Maimane, and she kissed Biko's girlfriend. Hey, she kissed and tried to make her own leader for their own DA. She tried to have a black leader of her, and somehow their kiss didn't work. But this is distortion of at the giganticest scale that is happening in South Africa, and there was another one that was just as bad as the first one I mentioned. I just forget. Yes, the land. You know, the land was taken. It wasn't. These people didn't come into empty spaces and put their shacks, their osovars up. That's what they did. They came here, and now they were these people who came into an empty country that had no firm structures anywhere. They were now thieves of land, which has got to be stolen away, and we must invade it. And they preach the invasion.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. There's a hand behind, so.
Sorry, I'm gonna
Okay.
just say, I wanted to just say, can we do one more? Because I know you've got a time constraint, and then unless you do very quick ones. Okay, if you can be. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, thank you so much. My name is Christopher Mtinga. I'm from Mediate Media and also Association of Independent Publishers. I understand with any kind of innovation when it comes to media space, there's either a seed funder, a sponsor. I want to ask you guys, how did you guys come up with the concept? Was it commissioned? Is it something that you needed to solve? Or is it something that you guys came up with, and who funds it? And your sustainability thereof of rolling it out, how is it funded? So that's one part of the question. The second one is really about, you know, with what you guys are doing at Ox Digital. Are there any other projects that you're doing that are more kind of in line with what you're doing, or is it primarily focusing on dissemination of content on digitally and making sure that the good work that you're doing, or is it are there other things that you guys are doing that are totally groundbreaking, giving you an opportunity just to sell another concept as well? Thank you.
Sorry.
You mean add value
Two
to the
quick
world?
ones, and then you can allow to
That's
respond.
so we don't see it as huh? No, okay, cool. Go for it.
Yeah, just a quick one. And you may have answered this, but I don't think you did. I assume that it just focuses on South Africa for the moment. And is there potential then to go into other countries, and how would that work?
My quick one, I first need to disclose that I'm a proud capitalist, and and I am very strongly in support of freedom of speech as well. And my question for you, Nicole, is allowing the algorithm to prevent certain things from going onto social media, is that not just a form of algorithmic censorship? Should we not rather have something where we can have a inform the crowd, you know, so kind of say, this has been flagged as red, blah, 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 you know, like YouTube do, X do, I believe, where there's community notes. Yeah, thank you.
They do.
That'll be my wrap up. Yeah, I mean, I think there are those dangers, right? That it's an algorithmic kind of censorship. I mean, as I say, I mean, we have for centuries practiced freedom of expression within a moderated context, right? I mean, your access to press space, and I know there've been complaints, but whether it's radio, whether it's television, whether it's press, there has generally been an arbitrator making a determination whether that information is worthy of being placed before the public eye. And we can quibble with it, but there generally is, and generally, right, there have always been points where we've used pseudonyms, or people have communicated anonymously. But again, it's generally that a moderator is making it a determination that, all things considered, the speech is so important, and we should protect the identity of that person. Again, that is completely sort of distorted in the social media context. People look for anonymous identities, right? They assume these avatars. There's nobody making a determination as to whether they rightly should have that. And then, of course, if you're not responsible for your speech, you can then post any sort of thing without any consequence. And so I agree. I mean, as I was looking at this tool, which I think is tremendously impressive, I was thinking, oh, well, this is an indication that the algorithms, of course, can be used differently, right? I'm not suggesting that it is the right way, and we might look to do that. But I think that there are all sorts of things that we should be discussing, right? I mean, again, that you shouldn't be able to post on social media under assumed identity unless there has been a moderator that has determined that actually it is in the public interest that your expression be placed in the public domain and that your identity be protected. Otherwise, you're just going to be tweeting or communicating completely irresponsible expression that is ultimately destructive and damaging to our democracy. So I think we've got to rethink these things, and I'm certainly not suggesting that I've got the answers to how we do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Maybe just to add on to what Nicole's saying, I think what happens with people's actions, the way we live our day-to-day lives, is often we're influenced in a way that it's called the human condition. Essentially, we're limited cognitively as to why we make doing certain things. So from an influence perspective, when I worked at Deloitte, we used to create basically something called an omni-channel approach to marketing. So that means, you could have, say, a billboard as one channel to kind of market something to someone, or you could have, say, an email that goes out and then you can see something, social media, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all these touch points, and then all those touch points together leads you to making a certain decision. So one example would be if you're on your phone right now, you might see an ad for new shoes and you're like, oh, I was just looking for new shoes yesterday. Or I was just thinking that I should, go check out this new place, and all of a sudden you see an ad for, a social occasion, and you think to yourself, was my phone listening to me? No, it's not listening to you. It's just because the algorithms are really powerful in terms of sending a message. So I think for us, just to elevate the conversation, it's to bring a tool like ours also brings awareness to how social media is influencing people and what is happening in that space. Because right now, I don't think a lot of people actually know the extent towards people are being influenced. So it goes back to the predicting what's going to happen, because those social platforms aren't actually releasing any real data to us to say, look, we've got 100 tweets, and these 100 tweets have a similar message, and they're saying to people, go commit a certain crime. In isolation, it doesn't seem that bad, but because different people are seeing these things, and then in addition to that, you've got a political figure saying something someone mentioned over the radio, etc., all of these compound towards having a certain action. So you can, like I mentioned earlier on, for a human to kind of think about all of those touch points and monitor all of these things. We can't. But for us, an I3 could eventually lead down the route where it's able to kind of pick up on all of these patterns. And then once we've got a good understanding and we're educated as to how people are being influenced by these things, then as a country, we then maybe can go down the route of saying, look, we've picked up that these things are having a very tangible impact. Here's the data and insights to back it up. And then we can install certain laws and kind of change the policies and maybe then institute, algorithmic rules around these things. But right now, it's very difficult, I think, for lawmakers to actually understand to what extent people are being influenced, because it's often hidden to them. Maybe just quickly to your question of I think it was around other projects we're busy with. We've developed something else with Witty. With the MMA called Witty. So who influences the influencer? That is essentially taking TikTok videos, and then we do two things. We're transcribing the audio, and then through sentiment analysis, we're able to detect whether certain influencers are getting paid by political parties or sponsored by political parties into certain decision making. Extremely powerful, because in a lot of cases they might not disclose it. And then we're also kind of taking still images of what's happening in that scene to add into that data. So that's one of the other projects for us. We are also developing other AI models beyond what we've discussed today. Those are looking to reduce the time humans spend doing certain activities. So for instance, in generating a proposal, it takes around 23 hours on average. That's kind of the industry standard. If we can get that down, we think we can get it down to about 2 hours. We're saving humans time off very admin intensive manual tasks. 30 years ago, humans didn't spend nearly as much time in front of computers. All of a sudden, it's seen as a good thing for us to be essentially bloodshot eyes 12 hours a day in front of one. If we can reduce the admin time between that and bring us back to doing the things that are more human-like, conversing with each other, having conversations, being creative, doing things that kind of spark instead of spending hours on end, say in the Excel spreadsheets, or doing admin type things and using technology to that, then that's kind of the goal.
Okay, and then sorry, just on a closing note, to perhaps answer the question there, and then I think Billy also had a question earlier around, perhaps taking this model and using it elsewhere. In terms of technical feasibility, it's certainly possible to take this model that we've now trained and use it elsewhere. But when you're going into new countries, you have to consider training a new version of the model. As we've narrowed it down to the South African context, we have a lot of South African slang in there. A lot of the target groups that we've cherry picked for our examples are related to South Africans as well. And so just in terms of language, you'd almost have to redo the process if you're going into a new country, unless you want to create a generalized model, in which case you would have to add examples for that new country. Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This concludes our first intimate conversation. There's still a session this evening at 6 o'clock. So those of you who can, please hang around. That's going to be a fascinating session looking at the Media Freedom Coalition. And then we start all of this again tomorrow. First session tomorrow is looking at elections. Then we've got mental health and journalists. And then in the evening, we've got a good fun game called Rate the Hate, where we look at a similar thing, but at hate speech. So as small tokens of thanks, we're going to present our speakers with a goodie bag, bribery and NGO style. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone.
Sure, thanks for it. Thank you.